Hey, what's up everyone? This is Joe with Last Few Spins, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about my top 25 favorite albums of the year 2025. Now this year I listened to 115 different albums, and each time I make sure that I listen to them at least like 3 times just to like really get a good idea of kind of how I feel about them and just the essence of the whole album. But before I get to my list, I want to talk about the channel just for a second. This spring and really through like the early part of 2025, I was making a video just about every week. And for those of you who are previous viewers of this channel or subscribers, you've noticed that I haven't really made a video in like the last 6 or 7 months. I just got to a point where I was putting a lot of time into it, a lot of hours, and I just... I was getting 30, 40 video views on each video sometimes, and it was just kind of getting harder to keep putting time into it. Along with that, I ended up moving this summer and just picking up some other hobbies and stuff like that. But I would like to get back to producing videos, maybe not at that weekly pace, just because sometimes that maybe burnt me out a little bit. But I still want to bring some content and document my thoughts on some different music related things. And this video in particular, talking about my top 25 albums of the year, is important to me, so it's something I wanted to bring to you guys. But without further ado, we will get to that list. I'll stop rambling. So number 25 on this list is Avett Brothers and Mike Patton. So this album takes the award for the most interesting collaboration of the last few years, and it's also one of my most anticipated albums of the year once it was announced. Released in mid-November, this is one of the later entries on this list, so it definitely gets harder to crack the top 25 at that point, but given how well each camp pulled this off, it certainly deserves a spot in this video. This album was something that Mike Patton and the Avett Brothers each needed in one way or another. For Patton, I love so much of Faith No More's work, but their overall output is limited, and we haven't seen anything new from that band since 2015's Soul Invictus. So I had really been wanting to hear some really good new Mike Patton music. To be fair, I haven't really ever listened to any of his other side projects like Mr. Bungle and whatever else, so maybe that's my fault. But in terms of the Avett Brothers, some of their albums in the early to mid 2010s are as good as it gets in that time frame, but their last couple releases have left little to be desired for me. This collaboration was a great way for them to get back on track to making intentional music and not just phoning it in, as it feels like both Patton and the Avett Brothers pushed each other to make something meaningful. The leading 2 tracks, Dark Night of My Soul and To Be Known, are probably the strongest parts of the album. However, we see Patton's wit shine throughout as we hear the emotion in Seth and Scott Avett's voice consistently as well, especially where all of their voices work together flawlessly in the last track called Received. If you're a fan of either artist, this is one that you definitely want to check out. Number 24 on this list is Kelsey Waldon, Every Ghost. Within this list, you won't find much country music, but this album in particular is country at its core, with just the right amount of traditional flair at the root of it. When it comes to modern acts within that genre, Kelsey Waldon might not be a household name, but she's certainly one of the most authentic. Behind the twang of her deep Kentucky accent is a woman who is an excellent storyteller, as she delivers an honest look at her own pitfalls that many of us experience in our own lives. My favorite tracks on Every Ghost include the title track, which also opens the album, as well as Lost in My Idolin', 2 of which are the types of songs that make you want to crack open a couple of cold ones. There's nothing new or groundbreaking about the song structures or deliveries, but the strength of the album is how well it's done in both the production and the execution, and how true it stays to the essence of what country music should be all about: heartbreak and spending too much time at the bar. Number 23 on this list is Mount Joy, Hope We Have Fun. Going into my listening experience with this album, I was pretty familiar with Mount Joy, having listened to all of their previous releases coupled with seeing them perform once at the Bourbon and Beyond Festival in Louisville, Kentucky. And at this point, I liked everything that they had done, but had kind of typecast them as sort of this carefree, campfire type of band that really hadn't broken out of their shell of their original sound to experiment outside of the type of music they had cut their teeth on. However, with Hope We Have Fun, we see Mount Joy trading the cargo shorts and puka shell necklaces for some blue jeans and a leather jacket. What I mean by this is that we finally see the lead singer, Matt Quinn, use some different registers within his vocals to develop a more well-rounded and poised collection of music. Even though a mid-album track titled Lucy retains that original Mount Joy sound and does it well, I love hearing him and the band dive into a 70s vibe in the ultra cool sounding Pink Lady. Pink Lady on a red motorcycle. Sorry, I had to do that. So that's where his vocals feel a little bit more full compared to an album's past. But also on the flip side of that is the track In the Middle, where he goes way up high and comes as close to sounding like Jeff Buckley that you can possibly come without being the legend himself. Overall, he and the band sound tight, and the updated production for their sound here in their fourth LP does wonders for them. Certainly my new favorite album by Mountjoy. Number 22 on this list is I Want My Loved Ones to Go With Me by Noah Cyrus. In my humble opinion, I think Noah Cyrus is by far the most talented artist in the family. Yes, Miley has a superstar career, but her over-singing and forced gravel in her voice can be fatiguing, and Billy Ray has not offered much outside of a novelty song in the 90s. However, Noah Cyrus has approached her music career with finesse, relying on her calming voice to focus on her storytelling and the emotional aspects of her earthly and grounded music. While her 2022 release, The Hardest Part, would be about my 6th or 7th best album of that year, this one doesn't quite reach those heights, but it is good enough to further increase my appreciation for Noah Cyrus. While there are no crazy highs on this album, there are also no low points, except a cameo from Blake Shelton, which I could do without, because he's kind of a douche. But overall, it's a cohesive piece of work, and she seems like someone who has solidified her sound as a modern folk artist within this album. And looking to the future, it will be interesting to see if she sticks with that, or if she starts to experiment a bit. Either way, I will be eagerly awaiting everything that she comes out with. Number 21 on the list is Mariah the Scientist, Hearts Sold Separately. This album in particular has some of the gnarliest production maybe on this whole list. Given that it's within the R&B realm, you should come to expect that, however it takes it to the next level. The bass within this album can be felt deep within your bones, where it has that deep rumble, but on the high end doesn't have any kind of buzz that distracts from the overall desired effect. The rest of the production is nice and clear, including her vocals that are out front, yet they feel like they're also embedded within the music. And as this album progresses, every track seamlessly flows to the next, where it plays out like scenes in a movie, as she's diving into all the normal topics of love and relationships. Another strong quality of this release is Mariah the Scientist's confidence within her delivery, which ends up attracting me to wanting to listen to this album even more. But even when it was released, I was enjoying it so much that I had to force myself to kind of move past it, but I've enjoyed revisiting it for the writing of this list. She just comes across as the type of vocalist that knows who she is, wants you to know about it, and you certainly feel that aura radiating from this album. Number 20 on the list is Spacey Jane, If That Makes Sense. One may listen to Spacey Jane and hear something that sounds like a lot of different indie rock bands from the 2010s and forward. But when I listen to this band, what stands out to me is I hear a group of young musicians who are hungry to make music and just simply love being in a rock band. With this being their third LP since their debut in 2020, they've given us enough to understand what Spacey Jane is all about. But this one may be their best example of what they can do with different tempos that make sense within the genre. Much of the album feels bright musically, while the lyrics, although very Gen Z, come across as an expression of youth that takes the listeners back in time to somewhere that is maybe a little less complicated, even when dealing with dating mishaps or screwing it up with the girl that you like. My favorite tracks include Whatever, a perfectly produced down-tempo song that has the most simple drum beat ever but sounds so good. How to Kill Houseplants is a look at what I mentioned before, some Gen Z symbolism that probably seems more clever to them than to us, but I will admit that I still love it based on the excellent melodies used and with the way that the song builds. If you want a solid indie rock album to check out, give this one a few listens as it gets better each time you put it on. Number 19 on this list is Morgan Wade, The Party Is Over. Morgan Wade has been one of the most prolific yet overlooked country artists within the 2020s, releasing now her fourth album since her 2021 debut, Reckless, which contained her most popular song, Wilder Days. The two albums between her debut and this one found her lyricism and narratives evolve as she seems to rapidly change as a person, overcoming the vices and heartbreak that may have tormented her in the past. But the interesting thing about The Party Is Over is that some of these songs were actually written years prior to 2025, in which you can notice in the lyrics some contradictions to who she appears to be now. Her musical style will always maintain a country flair as her twang cannot be denied, but her music tends to be somewhat genreless as there are as many rock elements as there are country elements. This album is really only held back for me by one track titled Candy from Strangers, which I'll be honest is kind of an absolute stinker. But she redeems herself in the album with the perfectly written tracks Left Me Behind, High in Your Apartment, and the heart-wrenching song Hardwood Floor. An acoustic track where she's pouring her heart out about desperately wanting to be a mother, but having struggles making that happen. That song in particular stopped me in my tracks the first time I heard it. Oddly enough, not every artist on this list is someone that I would necessarily recommend to you, the viewer, but Morgan Wade would be one that I would suggest checking out if you like country-adjacent artists and just good songwriting. Number 18 is an album titled Kerosene by Melissa Mary Ahern. Now, the album I'm talking about here is one that not a lot of people have probably stumbled upon in 2025. However, as the year was only a few weeks old and I was browsing the new releases on Apple Music, I came across this release by Melissa Mary Ahern. So this album is sort of a singer-songwriter type of album that does end up expanding into various soundscapes that fit each song like a glove. Sometimes it feels jazzy, other times it feels like a lullaby, especially in the title track Kerosene. But it all has a wave of melancholy over it and feels very personal not only in the lyrics, but how those lyrics are delivered in a sentimental way within each track. The lead-off track, Happy, is perhaps my favorite on the album, harnessing the feeling of taking a walk on a sunny day without a care in the world. Oddly enough, I think it's only been a cold, dreary time of the year when I visited this album in terms of when it came out in January and right now as I'm checking back in with it. But I can still feel that sense of springtime whenever I listen to it. My 17th favorite album of 2025 is an album titled Open Wide by Inhaler. Inhaler is one of those bands where I don't understand how they're not bigger than they are, at least here in America. For those of you who have heard of Inhaler are probably aware that the lead singer is the son of U2's Bono. His voice is incredibly similar. There's no denying his genetics, but he and the rest of the band has set off to do their own thing and produced nothing but a string of anthemic albums over the past few years that in a way has taken the torch from Bono but rekindled it with a more modern way of songwriting. Especially on this newest album, Inhaler never shy away from bright guitar tones and upbeat tempos that's impossible not to nod your head to. Within the track, Billy, we find an infectious melody in the chorus that has the perfect soundscape behind it to just simply make you feel good inside. And later on in the album, All I Got Is You continues that feeling of positivity through the up-tempo music and clear-sounding production. Overall, this album doesn't miss for me. What I will say is that sometimes it doesn't have that it factor that many of the albums ahead of it on this list do, but it's certainly another excellent entry from the Irish rockers named Inhaler. Number 16 on this list is an album called Big Dog by Bria Salmena. Bria Salmena's debut album was one of my most anticipated albums of the year, mostly because I've been waiting for it for a few years now, and she definitely didn't let us down with this one. I saw Bria open up for Wolf Alice in 2021 in the midst of her performing songs from an EP of covers of traditional country songs. Her smoky, raspy voice captivated me with that performance, but it wasn't until afterwards that I realized this wasn't her normal genre, as she had previously been the vocalist for an alternative band named Friggs. This year's full-length debut as a solo artist steered back into an alternative direction as she delivers a well-thought-out and brilliantly produced collection of songs that has been on a normal shuffle pattern for me throughout this year. The track Stretch the Struggle shows off Bria's emotional depth as she lets go of anything that would hold her voice back from doing what she does best, letting it all hang out even if it means her voice breaking a time or two or just, feeling a little out of control sometimes. It's refreshing for someone to sound so real and so authentically themselves, and the beat in that song is just completely gnarly. Twilight is a more delicate tune that showcases the other side of her vocal abilities, where she can draw us in and almost force us to listen closely by dialing down the intensity. Just a really diverse album that highlights Bria's strengths, and it paves the way for her to be one of the most underrated and interesting alternative acts of the modern era. Number 15 on this list is Panda Bear with Sinister Grift. I think it's easy for us to attach labels to an album or an artist that is channeling another decade in their modern output. For example, a lot of people consider the Lemon Twigs to be heavily influenced by the 60s, and rightfully so, but for me, that band and many others lack the quality of songwriting that was prevalent in decades prior. But in terms of this Panda Bear album, the 60s sound is not only heavily present within it, but also it does it flawlessly. The modern production gives it a clear, full sound that is sometimes lacking in older recordings, but it also contains so many tracks that pack a punch beyond just how they sound. This is an album full of interesting instrumentation to the point where every time I listen to it, I catch new things in the background that I hadn't heard before. Anywhere But Here would be my favorite track on Sinister Grift, with a swaying rhythm that feels like it's held back but also like it's not in a hurry to change, and it just works. This album feels psychedelic in nature but grounded enough that it's accessible and easy on the ears. The track titled Venom's End has some of the most gorgeous guitar tones you will hear, even if it's just a simple part being played. And Panda Bear is actually sort of a solo project by vocalist Noah Lennox, who is also a member of the band Animal Collective. Now, I can't speak for how this compares to the Animal Collective discography because I haven't gotten around to it yet, but I have listened to every Panda Bear album, and this one was by far the best one. It leads me to believe that this solo project has found its footing to keep producing sweet-sounding retro music such as what you will find in this album. Number 14 on this list is My Morning Jacket with Is. My Morning Jacket is one of those bands that have never really missed on an album. I know that there are some that seem to be less popular than others, of course, but they have the type of fan base that seem to be as loyal as it gets, and this band just continues to reward them with more and more great music now over 25 years into their career. Jim James' vocals are instantly recognizable in any setting, and this newest album is one of the best showcases of his talents, or at least what makes him unique. As this album plays out, it feels fun, and like it was made while the band was incredibly motivated and fresh. That's the feeling that I get from it, especially in a few of my favorite tracks, for example, Half a Lifetime and I Can Hear Your Love. I've been fortunate enough to see My Morning Jacket perform in their hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, which will always be a live moment that I'll look back on with fondness as I experienced firsthand just how much people love this band. I thought I was plenty familiar with them until I was surrounded by people that was just belting out every word of every deep cut that they were playing that night, and I realized that the depth of this band in the grand scheme of music history makes them one of the greatest bands of the 2000s, and this newest album only solidifies that further. Number 13 is Last Dinner Party with From the Pyre. While their debut album didn't click with me as much as it seemed to click with everyone else, I view their second release, From the Pyre, as a big improvement, as I feel like they kind of better express themselves in a little more free way in this one, and it also seems like a band who has gained confidence after being on the road and gaining experience playing together more. They maintain their theatrical feel, but the songs have more hooks and depth, which all works together to produce a sprawling record of both rock and rock-adjacent tracks. Parts of this album feel like something Florence and the Machine would release, where it feels grandiose and full in the production, and in some way puts them at the forefront of the interesting female-led acts of the present-day indie scene. I've seen reviews of this album that make it seem like it's just more of what they showed us in their debut. However, I do see it as how they've shown a lot of growth between that one and this album, and I can only assume that they'll keep pushing themselves in the future to do the same. My 12th favorite album of the year is Snipe Hunter by Tyler Childers. Now, Tyler Childers is just one of those artists that once you understand his essence as a musician, you will likely enjoy everything that he does. As one of the most genuine dudes within the country music genre, you can expect clever turns of phrase within his songwriting, a tendency to get a little rowdy, and yet also the ability to craft a meaningful love song that avoids all of the overused tropes. For example, Onita is a slower track that references a love affair between a younger man and an older woman. Not quite a theme that has been used very much, but he does it in a way that catches your attention as you find yourself rooting for him to finally get what he's looking for. On the flip side of that, musically, are some of the tracks with more gumption, such as Bitin' List and Cuttin' Teeth. Bitin' List is a track where Tyler Childers reveals to someone that he just flat out does not like them, while Cuttin' Teeth is about the journey it takes for an artist to learn the ins and outs of being a musician on the road as you're crafting your own music career. This track and many others feel personal to him, where even when things get a little far-fetched, you still want to believe his stories because they're just so interesting. Tyler Childers is a truly one-of-a-kind, and this album only highlights his strengths as an artist. So at number 11, just missing the top 10, is Moisturizer by Wet Leg. In 2022, Wet Leg came out of the gate hot with their self-titled debut and caught the attention of everyone who pays any attention to the music world. Once the cycle for that album died down, they went back to work on their newest album, Moisturizer, which would be highly anticipated, as everyone wondered how they could possibly follow up their debut. In typical Wet Leg fashion, they hit the ground running with the lead single, Catch These Fists, a chaotic joyride that gave us a sneak peek into what we might expect from album number 2. However, once the entire work was delivered, we also got to hear a laid-back version of Wet Leg with a track like Davina McCall, proving that they could do more than just those balls-to-the-wall type of rock songs. But in some weird way, even though they expand their range with this album, I still probably prefer the debut to this one. There are some memorable songs on here as well, but towards the end it becomes slightly forgettable for every song between Pond Song and 1121. What's bizarre is once those come on, I feel like I do like them in some way or another, but as soon as they're over, I just completely forget what they are. So this one is held back a bit by that, but obviously it's a strong and fun album to listen to, as it's still pretty high on this list. So before we get into the top 10, I want to invite you to subscribe here to Last Few Spins if you are enjoying this content. Like I kind of mentioned earlier in the video, I don't know how much I'm going to produce moving forward, hopefully more, but I still would appreciate if you give me a subscription and at least like the video and comment some of your favorite albums of 2025 as well. I'd love to read all about it. But that brings us to our top 10. Number 10 on our list is Alice Phoebe Lou, Oblivion. If there is an artist with a more relaxing vibe than Alice Phoebe Lou, I haven't found them yet. I'm still a recent fan of hers, as I just discovered her a few months ago when I saw her band Strong Boy as an opening act. However, as I found myself captivated by her and her band, I still had no idea that she was Alice Phoebe Lou until I was researching Strong Boy afterwards. I had heard her name before but wasn't familiar enough with her to recognize her voice at the time. But as I decided to dive into her own albums, I kept finding one gem after another. With the release of this year's album, Oblivion, I couldn't have had a better collection of tracks to experience while taking walks throughout the woods as the leaves begin to turn brown and fall on the ground. It's just that type of album. It's whimsical and light, but the lyrics feel important and intentional. Alice Phoebe Lou's raw vocals are beautiful enough on their own that she can carry the whole album just based on that, but her simple instrumentation and arrangements are also produced in a way that only elevates her voice. The album is consistent in quality all the way through, but my favorites would be The Surface and With or Without. If you appreciate raw songwriting talent, I would definitely recommend you check this one out. Number 9 on this list is Lola Young, I'm Only Fucking Myself. So first things first, Lola Young's newest album is not for the faint of heart. She cranks up the raunchiness to 100 in this one, but this also might be my favorite guilty pleasure album of the year. All of her lyrics are incredibly adult themed, whether it's about relationships or even drugs, and it can feel somewhat over the top at times, but damn it if it's not all underneath some infectious pop melodies and irresistible hooks. I don't really expect to see this album on too many best of 2025 lists, but something about all these songs just make them a blast to sing along to, and you find yourself rooting for her. She always just feels like the ultimate underdog. From the outside, it appears that Lola Young is going through some very personal things, and she uses her music to work through it all, as many people do. Which, this all comes across very authentic, and as if she's not afraid to sound ridiculous, even if, she is a little bit over the top at times. That can bite her sometimes, however, as the first actual song on this album following the beginning interlude is somewhat repulsive. It's titled Fuck Everyone. It's hard to listen to just simply on a musical level, but then lyrically it's where it really kind of jumps the shark. You can look it up for yourself if you're curious, but don't judge the whole album just based on that. As after this track it turns into this truthful and vulnerable kind of pop rock record that only gets better with each listen. Their production does the instrumentation justice, but also makes sure that she stays front and center. And if not for that first song, there truly wouldn't be a bad song on it. Number 8 on this list is an album called Blue by Innocent. So the album I'm talking about here is the only one on this list where I really know absolutely nothing about this artist. Not because I haven't tried, but because there's simply so little information on the internet. I have figured out through Apple Music credits that the female vocalist's name is Linnea Haakonsen, and it may be only one other person that plays a part in this project. As well, I think they're Swedish, but overall there really isn't any live performances or photos of them that I can find other than the album artwork. So I'm kind of in the dark in regards to the background of this artist, but to actually talk about the album itself and why it's so high on this list, my main answer is that it's just a gorgeous sounding record from start to finish. Her vocal style is somewhere in the middle of Fiona Apple and Lana Del Rey, in a way that she commands your attention like Fiona, but still has some of the higher register like flutteriness of Lana. The musical arrangement is simple and held back, but still has the same type of depth that best works when paired with this type of vocal style. The songwriting seems to be from the perspective of a female that's grasping at a relationship that is spiraling, featured on tracks like Where Did You Go Last Night and Coming Back to Me in particular. This album was recommended to me by my good friend Paul, who stumbled across it while browsing new releases, and said it seemed like something that I would like, and he was 100% correct about that. So thank you, Paul, for telling me about this excellent album, Blue by Innocent. Number 7 on my list is Deep Sea Diver, Billboard Heart. Now, when this album released, I didn't know much about Jessica Dobson and Deep Sea Diver. However, I listened to it and gave it a solid rating of 3.5 out of 5 stars at the time. However, when I got tickets to see Deep Sea Diver in Indianapolis in May, I gave it another listen beforehand and bumped it up to 4 stars based on liking a couple more songs. But then I went to the show, and after being literally as close to the stage as you could possibly get, I fell in love with almost every song on this album from that live experience and consider this now a 4.5 star album for those of you who may care about that. The moral of that story is that this album is a grower, but now that I'm familiar with it, I really don't understand why it took me so long to love it. Its riffs and songwriting are accessible and engaging, and her passion for creating music shines through the songs themselves, and in particular the songs Billboard Heart and Shovel would probably be in my top 25 songs list of the year if I were to sit down and think about it. She has the kind of wholesome rock and roll energy that makes her feel like an underdog, but you're just captivated by her performance skills, and I consider myself lucky to have been like a foot from her on stage as she was rocking that small little venue in Indy. I mean, her fretboard was literally like right here as she was shredding. I'd recommend you listening to this album multiple times and even backtracking to some of her older stuff as well. You certainly won't be disappointed. Number 6 on this list is Arcy Drive, The Pit. So Arcy Drive is one of the most interesting new indie rock bands to emerge out of 2025, in my opinion. Channeling somewhat of a garage rock sound, but in the way that still feels destined for big things. And as I listen to this album, I can't help but hear many different bands, or at least many different lead singers within the vocalist of Arcy Drive. For example, the track Oak Tree and Creatures of the Night sounds like a couple of Lumineer songs, while Rocket Chair feels very Tom Yorkie. And then most of everything else seems to channel kind of a Cage the Elephant kind of vibe. I'm not really one to hold that against a band per se when they sound like other bands, as long as they do those things well, and in this case, this album is just simply badass. The song titled The Itch will have you belting out the chorus every time it comes around. Same with Louie, a bright-sounding little bop that is impossible not to love the very first time you hear it. I tried to get tickets to see Arcy Drive actually at the same venue that I saw Deep Sea Diver. However, I think they've started to catch on a bit as the resale tickets were already over $150, and I opted out that time, but I will make sure to try to see them in the future because I know they'll rock. Breaking into the top 5 of this list is Nation of Language, Dance Called Memory. For those of you unfamiliar with Nation of Language, the best way I can describe them is they're like that 70s electronic band Kraftwerk, if Kraftwerk actually made good music with real song structures that evolved and morphed into something listenable. But it's much more than just listenable, as I've loved this band for the past few years after they blew my mind as an opening act that I hadn't looked into prior to seeing them. It's just a simple trio that uses a lot of electronic elements within their music, but it never has that repetitive feel that many bands within that genre suffer from. They know how to thoughtfully use synths and drum machines that never sound artificial, even if they technically are. The production is very slick and modern sounding at times, but also mixed incredibly well, with the vocals nailing that breathy sound without ever seeming too thin. Nation of Language's vocalist seems to be in tune with his writing and his poetry, and this album captures that quality that he possesses throughout this work. When the lead-off single, Inept Apollo, dropped, I can't say it grabbed me right away, but then once I heard the album in full, it felt like it fit into what they were trying to accomplish, which is not anything too different from their previous albums, but just an excellent continuation of what makes them one of my favorite newer bands. My 4th favorite album of 2025 is CMAT, Euro Country. So this was an album where I knew it was somewhat acclaimed prior to listening to it. However, that usually makes me judge and critique the music even more and make me less likely to give it credit. But with this CMAT album, I found it easy to listen to right away, but then with repeated listens, I just wanted to start it over again as soon as those last few bars of Janis Joplining hit. CMAT is a singer whose Irish accent comes through within her phrasing, so I found it interesting to hear this type of music sang in that way. She's witty, clever, and possesses a knack for allowing her voice to zip upstairs and back down in a heartbeat, and it produces these catchy little moments that I fell in love with each time I listened to this album. The tracks Take a Sexy Picture of Me and Ready were a couple of my favorites, really accentuating the middle part of the 12-track album, however it feels consistent all the way through. After becoming more familiar with it, the album's title track Euro Country feels so appropriate because many of these songs have steel guitar and resemble some of the song structures found within country songs. But it's almost like if you put Adele in a country band and told her to just let loose and stop with all the crooning. It feels fun, upbeat, and like CMAT is just a girl ready to tackle the world. I truly love every bit of it and would love to have it even higher on this list if not for some of the albums yet to come. So my third favorite album of 2025 is Sam Fender, People Watching. Somewhere between Bruce Springsteen and the War on Drugs, we find UK rock superstar Sam Fender, an artist who is no stranger to producing some of the most anthemic and catchy rock songs of the past decade. While still young, he's made an impact in the music industry, with this album taking home the 2025 Mercury Prize for the best album made by an artist from either the UK or Ireland. Spoiler alert, while it is well deserved, I actually have one other nominee still to come in this video, as well as the album I just talked about, Euro Country, being nominated for that same award. I tend to love artists and bands from the United Kingdom, but this year in particular just seems to really show that on my list. But in terms of what I love about Sam Fender's music, it just feels like he was born to write meaningful music, and he seems to wear his heart on his sleeve, not just in the lyrics, but with how he delivers those lyrics. His vocals are strong and confident, and he's great about making sure his arrangements drive the songs forward. There's always solid guitar work and some great sounding drums to propel a Sam Fender album into greatness, and this one is no different. Some of my favorite tracks from this one would be Arm's Length, Wild Long Lie, and Crumbling Empire, but literally the whole thing is excellent. So my second favorite album of 2025 is Sharon Van Etten and The Attachment Theory. So as we get into the top two albums of this list, I'll mention that these are the only two that I consider 5-star albums. But to focus on this one first, I just cannot deny how this piece of art makes me feel. It's atmospheric and engaging from start to finish, and we find each member of this band playing at their absolute best, including Sharon's vocal work being some of the best she has ever done. This album comes from Sharon Van Etten deciding to work with her touring band on creating their own album altogether. While on tour for her 2022 release, Sharon encouraged her band to vibe within some jam sessions to see what would come of it. The tracks I Can't Imagine Why You Feel This Way and my personal favorite from this album, Southern Life, were two songs that emerged from that experiment. It's clear to see why she changed her approach to songwriting to include others in the creative process for this first time, because everyone in The Attachment Theory seems like they've been working their entire lives to be up at this point creatively. While everything about this album is strong, musically what takes it over the top for me is the bass work. The bass line to the track Trouble is one of the most intoxicating riffs that I've ever heard, as the notes seem to walk all over the place but always sound controlled and like they belong with everything else happening in the track. As a matter of fact, as I just saw my Apple Music replay for 2025, Trouble was my most listened to song of the year. As a deep sea diver, I was lucky enough to also be on the rail for a Sharon Van Etten and the Attachment Theory show in September, although not right up on the stage, but certainly close enough that it was one of the most engaging live performances that I had seen in recent memory. And while there was a lot of Sharon's previous work mixed into that set list, the show was primarily comprised of what was on this album. It's just a spectacular work of art that needs to be heard by anyone who appreciates music. So now's the time to reveal my favorite album of 2025, and to do that, I have a little bit of a visual aid. It is Wolf Alice, The Clearing. So I feel like no matter what I say here, I'll probably have a hard time relaying how much I hold this band in high regard, and how much I think this album has once again put Wolf Alice at the highest level of artistry that any band in the world could achieve. Behind Ellie Rousel's chameleon vocals, Joel's effortless drumming, Joff's hidden but sick little guitar riffs, and Theo's progressive bass lines, it's a band that's been firing on all cylinders as soon as they hit the ground running with their debut album in 2015. The Clearing is now their fourth album, with each one having enough time in between to marinate and allow the band to evolve and grow into what they want to be with each release. Within this one, we see Wolf Alice channel more of a 70s vibe with many of these songs, which, in talking to other fans of the band, not everyone has been fond of, but tracks like Bloom Baby Bloom is so unique that it's almost timeless in terms of how it really wouldn't fit perfectly into one decade. I suppose that almost makes it like it's ahead of its time, really. Play It Out is a more tender song that showcases the emotion that Ellie is capable of conveying within her songwriting, and it appears that her maturation as an artist has only led to that. My favorite track, not just of this album, but in all of 2025, would be the final song on The Clearing, titled The Sofa. If that song has been stuck in my head once since its release, it's been there over 100 times. And I honestly don't mind, because it's such a masterful performance that feels cohesive, and it has some of the most elegant production that you could possibly attach to what was previously primarily known as a rock band. With this song and many others, Wolf Alice proves that they can create a relaxing atmosphere with their music, and even with as much as I love their heavier songs, this sound also was more than welcome. Overall, I know this Wolf Alice album will likely not reach the critical acclaim that Blue Weekend did in 2021, as they set the bar very high with that album. But to me, The Clearing is yet another groundbreaking entry into what is my favorite band's discography.